When I was a kid, I was addicted to the horror and fantasy genres. Here I have a story I wrote in the first grade called The Monsters. The cover is a pretty graphic display of a bunch of different body parts. I have a large version here so you can see it better. In case you're wondering, the story's about me running through a haunted house full of monsters, fighting off Dracula, Poltergeist, and this thing here, which is a monster made up of floating body parts. Anyways, I escape the house, run home and get some weapons, and then kill all the monsters. So when I got a little bit older and found the Tales from the Crypt comic books, I was pretty much in love. Tales from the Crypt, if you don't know, is part of a controversial line of horror comics from the 50s with fun subject content and twist endings. Here I have a couple examples. They came under various names: The Vault of Horror, Crime Suspense Stories, a couple other ones. Every once in a while they would feature a story by a writer named Ray Bradbury. After reading a couple of his stories, I started to collect just those because they were so good. This is what I would look for, his name right here on the cover. And this pretty much began my lifelong fascination with Ray Bradbury. If you don't know who he is, he wrote Fahrenheit 451, that's probably his most recognizable title. But he also wrote a lot of different things. Pretty much as soon as he started publicizing his stories, they started adapting them for radio, movies. For example, I watched It Came from Outer Space in 3D a couple years ago at the Palm, which is based on one of his stories. So I'd like to take a closer look at some of the things that make him such a unique person. He's a unique talent. He's got a wild imagination, and he often writes stories that deal with technology. So I want to discuss some of these things. First, I want to talk about his diverse talents. His personal website has him credited with over 30 novels and 600 short stories. He also wrote essays, poems, plays. He wrote for TV. He actually had his own show that he wrote every episode for. Did the stories in The Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He did movies of his. He actually wrote the screenplay for Moby Dick. On a YouTube interview on the University of California's YouTube channel, he's credited with having won every writing award conceivable, which is pretty impressive. He also proposed a mass transit monorail system for the LA area, but it was rejected. It was still a good idea. That leads me to my next point about his wild imagination. He writes stories pretty much every genre you can think of. Pick up one story, there's one called The Sound of Summer Running about a kid who buys his first pair of tennis shoes for the summer, and the great feeling he gets running through the town for the first time. Another story you might find about a mean undertaker that does really unspeakable things to the bodies of people from the town who died and have made him mad in the past. There's all kinds of different stories that he writes though. He's also credited with having written about things way before they were invented. In the 50s, he was writing about wall screen TVs, interactive TV, mechanical dogs, the Walkman, and even space travel, way before they were realities. This brings me to my next point about a lot of his stories dealing with technology. Fahrenheit 451 is probably the easiest example. That one's about the government outlawing and burning books, and then how people embrace technology more than creativity. One of my favorite episodes from his television show is called The Murderer. It's about this guy in the future who gets locked up for destroying other people's pieces of technology because they annoy him. He calls cell phones a device that just sits there demanding to be used. And the stuff he writes about becomes more and more relevant as time goes on. So I talked about his diverse talent, his wild imagination, and his stories that deal with technology. In closing, I want to share with us a story from his autobiography about the time he went to the carnival when he was a boy. He saw this performance by a magician named Mr. Electrico, and during the performance, Mr. Electrico looked right at him and said, "Live forever." Ray Bradbury was curious, so he went back to the carnival and snuck in and found Mr. Electrico sitting by his trailer. He wanted to ask him how to live forever, but he couldn't muster the courage, so he just asked Mr. Electrico to show him the magic trick. Mr. Electrico showed him the magic trick and then introduced him to the carnival sideshow freaks, including the Illustrated Man, which would later become a title of one of his novels. Bradbury left that day with tears streaming down his face, having felt the surge of electricity being impacted by Mr. Electrico so much. So while I know Mr. Electrico, I'd like to leave you with the parting words of live forever. Thank you.